And welcome everyone to the session Ask the Experts, Linux and PowerShell on Azure. We will have a team of product and technical experts from Microsoft to answer some of your questions today. And how to engage with the experts? We have a chat open, or the Q&A session open for you in the audience, and you can raise the questions you would like to be answered by the experts today. And your questions will appear to the experts here, and we will answer them one by one. Hopefully, you will get many questions coming from you, and the ones that get most of the votes, upvotes from the audience, will be answered verbally. And some of the questions, the people on this side will answer using the chat function. And a couple of words about the etiquette. So the session may be recorded, and if you don't want your name to be visible when asking the questions, you can tick the box to be anonymous. And there's the mandatory fine print about Microsoft Code of Conduct. And the experts today are, let's ask actually the guys to introduce themselves. So let's start with Danny. How about a small introduction?
Sure. Hey folks, I'm Danny Martins. I'm a program manager on the PowerShell team. I am responsible for Azure Cloud Shell as well as Win32 OpenSSH.
Perfect. And next, Joey. Remember to unmute yourself, Joey.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Joey. I'm a program manager on the PowerShell team as well, and I own the PowerShell engine, work on a bunch of the open source stuff that we do. I'm really excited to be here this morning.
Thanks, Joey. And Jason, your turn.
Hey, everyone. Well, I'm Jason Helmick, a program manager on the PowerShell team, and I spend most of my time thinking about shell improvements.
Thanks, Jason. And my name is Tony. I work as a cloud solution architect for Microsoft based in Finland, and I mostly work actually with our partners and customers. So I'm not from the product team side. So I have some first-hand experience on what it means to use these technologies. And let's go forward. So at this point, let's see, we have some questions in the Q&A published already. So maybe a first PowerShell question. Where can I find how to keep up to date to the new commandlets? How about Joey? Is this a question for you?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, it's going to be highly dependent on which product and module that you're using. So, individual product teams generally own the modules that support and manage the product that PowerShell module interacts with. And you're going to want to stay plugged into those channels for those product teams if that's particularly important to you. So, if it's Teams, staying up on Teams blog and the Teams user voice and that sort of thing is the best way that you're going to get information. But we also have the PowerShell gallery where most of these modules get uploaded nowadays. And simply using update module to get the latest versions of those modules from the PowerShell gallery is one of the best ways just to make sure you have the latest modules installed. Lastly, you should definitely check out aka.ms/PS module compat, which I will paste as a reply here into the chat as well. And there you can find out the latest information on which modules are supported by PowerShell 7 and which may not yet be supported. So definitely keep an eye on that as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Joey. Next question is about PowerShell versus Bash. So I know this is a tricky one. So the question goes like, should we be thinking as an organization about having admins use PowerShell or Bash, which is a recommendation? Any volunteers for this tricky question, I would say?
I mean, yeah, I'll volunteer.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll volunteer and then throw it over to Danny real quick by saying use both. There's an advantage to knowing more than having just one tool in your toolbox. And while PowerShell, I of course think it's an incredibly powerful one, and I will opt for that. It's not the only thing I know how to use, because in different situations, depending upon what problem you're trying to solve, that additional knowledge can be really beneficial. So I vote for both.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what Jason said. Definitely both have different values and different benefits. And coming from a Cloud Shell point of view, as what we provide both a Bash experience and a PowerShell experience. And so it's really, you're looking for which environment or which tool best fits my skill set and what's best geared towards what I'm trying to do and manage. And so it's not really one or the other. It's really whatever you're comfortable with, or if you want to reach kind of your hands in both baskets, you can do that.
Yeah, makes perfectly sense. And actually myself, I'm coming from the Unix and Linux admin world, so I don't have any first-hand experience on PowerShell. But luckily, when we're working with Azure, like everything is available on Bash. So it's not like you need to choose one, choose both. Whatever you know best. And next question actually comes from about what is the biggest consideration coming from Windows PowerShell scripting into the Linux world? So you guys, you are the gurus of PowerShell. Did some of you like go to the Linux side and learn about Linux scripting? Any comments on this question? I don't see any volunteers.
No, I'm more than happy. Yeah. So, so I'd say, obviously in the Linux world, you have significantly more kind of management layers that are ultimately files underneath the hood, right? So in the Windows world, a lot of these modules that are interacting with Windows Server management or Windows Client management are using .NET, Win32 APIs. And there's sort of more of this object-based approach. And in the Linux world, Bash is very heavily a text processing kind of shell where you're doing a lot of text parsing and sort of cutting things up. So, that still is the case for those native utilities that are not necessarily supported by PowerShell commandlets. So, you may end up using a lot more of those sort of string-based commandlets to do that parsing, similar to, how you would use grep, set, or awk in the Bash world. Now, additionally, I think it's important to note that on Linux, you do not have the Windows PowerShell component available, right? So this is the old .NET framework-based PowerShell. And when we went to cross-platform and open source, we broke PowerShell off into this variant called PowerShell Core 6, which later evolved into PowerShell 7, which we GA'd earlier this year. And with that, there's sort of early question about, hey, which modules, how do I keep up to date? Understanding that some of these modules are not yet fully Linux compatible, but many are, is something to take into consideration as well, because some of the modules that you may have been using on Windows PowerShell may no longer be supported in the PowerShell 7 world, although that gap is very rapidly narrowing. So,
yeah, thanks, Joy. Then actually there are two questions which are kind of related. First one asks about the PowerShell adoption on Linux. And I think a highly relevant question is, how do we actually encourage the Linux admins to try PowerShell? Jason? You look like smiling.
I think this is a really interesting question. A lot of times I kind of look at that question and I ask myself, why am I asking that question? From a lot of perspective, if you're a Linux admin, you already have a very vast toolbox that's really rich. Do you need PowerShell? Well, that's kind of up to your decision. In other words, it may assist you, it may not. I think if you're a Linux admin, and having worked with a lot of Linux admins, if you're managing, especially if you're managing Windows, learning PowerShell is wonderful, because now you have something that you have a tool that will help you manage Windows, and you can also use it to help you manage Linux, so you get more bang for your buck. If you are pure Linux admin, you may or may not see the value in utilizing PowerShell because of that rich tool set. So that's really kind of a decision that is encouraged by your situation.
Yeah, excellent. Then I found a very interesting question. I don't know if we actually have an answer for this, but the question is if PowerShell is going to replace CMD, so the command com, in future versions of Windows and Windows Server. If so, when?
Yeah, so I can take that one pretty briefly. CMD is a legacy tool. I will paste a blog post from the one of the owners in the Windows console and CMD team who wrote about this, basically saying, hey, CMD, we're not making updates to CMD. We're not making changes to CMD. It needs to work exactly the same way it's worked for the last 10, 20 years so that your legacy batch scripts all continue to work. But the reality is that, if you're doing any kind of new modern scripting, you should probably be using PowerShell. That being said, there are no plans to remove CMD from Windows anytime soon. So CMD needs to stay there for those legacy scripts. And the sort of side-by-side experience that we have today is likely going to be the one into the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And hey, Tony,
Thanks.
if I can jump in here real quick and just kind of add to what Joey said. Some people may have heard this, but about 2009, 2010, Jeffrey Snover, who invented PowerShell, was asked this same question. And he said something towards the effect of, my grandchildren are going to learn about CMD, which was really funny at the time. But here we sit in 2020, and I don't know about you, Tony, but my grandchildren are learning about CMD. So I think we're going to have that around for a long time.
Yeah, that's interesting. We actually probably have to have some conversation about what they teach our children. Next question. There are lots of upvotes for question about consolidated authentication and connection process. So it's difficult to write PowerShell that touches multiple environments, on-prem AD, Exchange, Office 365, OneDrive, and so on. So Joey, maybe you have some comments on this.
Yeah, and this is similar to the original question that was asked, and I see that this is a follow-up about the module compatibility list being updated around Azure AD, Microsoft Teams. Totally understand that this is a pain point right now. We don't have this sort of central point of information. That's what this doc is really intended to be, is the central point of information going forward about which modules are working when, and I understand that's a little bit work in progress. But we're working with a lot of the teams in Office 365 around exactly what the story is for module support on Linux, and we'll be trying to publish more and more of that guidance going forward. So I hear you. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer right now than yes, like what you're doing to keep up with it right now is the right thing to be doing. But hopefully we have some more unification within that doc that was posted above in the near future.
I'm also going to jump in if that's all right as well. In terms of a authentication and connection process to connecting to all those different environments, at least from a Cloud Shell point of view, when you use Cloud Shell, you're already authenticated into Azure, and then you also it's a little bit of a lesser known fact, you also can connect to your Exchange Online endpoints as well as your Teams endpoints as well. And so we're gearing Cloud Shell to kind of be that one location where you have authenticated access into all those different environments that you want to manage in your cloud. We haven't done explicitly work to look at on-prem AD, but for really the other Microsoft clouds, we are working on or already have the ability to just directly connect into those environments pre-authenticated.
Great, thanks, Danny. And there are a couple of times mentioning again about the PowerShell on Linux and specifically tool availability on Red Hat and Fedora-based distros versus Ubuntu. And it was already answered in the chat with a couple of links, but is there anything anyone wants to add verbally for this topic? Like, do we prefer Ubuntu in the future on this field when it comes to PowerShell, or is it going to be like all Linux is the same?
So I'm actually not totally sure that this question was specifically about PowerShell. I'm happy to answer it for PowerShell. Generally speaking, we have total parity between Red Hat and Ubuntu, and that's great thanks to the .NET team for all the awesome work they've done in making that sort of distinction equivalent. But I think this one may actually be more about some of the tools, the native tools that get shipped within the Red Hat packages.microsoft.com repository versus the Ubuntu one. So hopefully you're not seeing any differences on the PowerShell front.
Yeah, and also what comes like the supporting, like generally Azure supporting different Linux distributions. We don't kind of make difference, but there are differences in the technology that sometimes something is already supported in some distro, and sometimes we need to help the distro vendor to implement something in there. And the other difference that is not in the tool, but is possibly the partnership of like business level, like the customers are buying support for certain distros, and some distros are only available as a best effort. For example, like CentOS. And then there's a question about, will you include PowerShell core in the Windows in the future?
I would love to take that one. So the primary difficulty that we have, this is the #1 request that we get, unfortunately. Fortunately, it's great for the popularity of PowerShell, but the unfortunate reality is that the underlying .NET that we use is supported in long-term servicing LTS for 3 years. Windows distributions generally need to be supported for 5 years plus an additional 5 years for those enterprise customers in extended support scenarios, and often even further, for operating systems like 2008 R2 when you're running them on Azure, right? So because of this, we have this commitment to stability. We cannot move between major .NET versions within a single version and edition of Windows or Windows Server. And as a result, we don't currently have the capacity to support PowerShell 7 for the duration of Windows. However, we're making it much easier to install, deploy, and update and manage PowerShell 7 on both Windows 10 clients and Windows Server machines. So we recently shipped PowerShell 7 Preview in the Microsoft Store, and you will be seeing the stable versions come through over the next couple of months. And we're also hard at work on delivering PowerShell 7 into the download catalog so that you can deploy it, audit your updates, and deploy updates using your SCCM, WSUS, or Intune workflows. So stay tuned on that information, but unfortunately today we don't have an immediate plan to go and deliver PowerShell 7 as a Windows built-in feature.
Cool. And there's a very interesting question, not related to Linux, but again, PowerShell on Windows. Like, I guess the question behind the comment here is like, what happens if you actually disable command on Windows and only have PowerShell enabled?
I don't know, but you probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of reason for it to be. I'm not even sure that you can turn CMD off in Windows.
Yeah, I don't know if it's how it's built in. And coming from Linux world myself, like I'm not being an expert on Windows, I always manage to screw it up, and this feels like one way of doing it. But yeah, good. Let's seek for some other questions here. There are lots of questions about Bash versus PowerShell and how to learn this as a Linux admin and so on. And there was one question specifically that was asking like what kind of new skills you need to learn as kind of Windows PowerShell user when you come to the Bash and Linux world. And I think some of the skills that are really needed is to learn how the file permissions work, how things like SE Linux for different security levels work, and so on. So there's lots of things to go through there, and we will have at the end, we will show some links to resources that help you get started with some of the more advanced stuff what comes to Linux and Azure specifically. And there was a question also, I think we did not answer this, a module compatibility for Azure AD, Teams, and Exchange Online Management and others. And given the announcement they are using disparate or separate methods is quite difficult today. Do we have something to say about this? It was a question from Robin. Let's see I'll take a look what is the most voted question right now. We haven't answered yet. Lots of comments about the organizational changes again. Maybe, Joey, you were part of the previous session last night. What were the most common questions we received in that session? Maybe you could recap a couple of them.
Yeah, so there were some similar ones actually that we've already done here. Great reasons for folks to use PowerShell versus Bash, and sort of when one and when the other. PowerShell 7 and Windows, phenomenal. But I'm actually interested to hear about some of the and there was a lot of interest in the last session about some of the innovations happening in the Linux space on Azure. Is that something you could speak to, Tony, about the fact that what sort of awesome stuff is making Azure a great platform for the Linux distributions?
Yeah, there are a couple of things, and actually there were a couple of announcements during this within Ignite, and I think one of the most interesting one has been, for example, the hybrid benefit for Linux, which basically helps the customers who already have an existing enterprise Linux contract with companies like Red Hat or SUSE. When they want to reuse their existing subscription or license investments, they can now do it officially when they bring their virtual machines to Azure. And I think this is one of the quite cool things. And another thing that personally that lots of my customers have been asking, and we actually announced the preview availability, I think a couple of weeks ago, is the support for shared disks for Linux on Azure and also for Windows for Azure. But this helps very much for clustered applications and even like mission critical applications like SAP on Linux on Azure. I guess cool. That's Joey, something that would interest also. Okay, let's take the next question from the audience. Is there a plan to improve the PowerShell GET functionality to better support NuGet repositories like Azure DevOps?
Yeah, so my understanding today is that the PowerShell GET module should already work great with v3 endpoints, despite the fact that the PowerShell gallery itself is still a v2 endpoint today. We are also releasing PowerShell GET 3.0, which will be is already available in preview. Already works great against v3 endpoints as well, and so that is something that if you want to interact directly with a NuGet endpoint v3 that's hosting PowerShell modules and artifacts, that should be working awesome. The PowerShell package management module also still ships in PowerShell 7. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what the state of it is in regards to loading assemblies, but the NuGet CLI does continue to work great. The REST APIs for NuGet continue to work great with an invoke REST method on PowerShell, and so if there's something more than that you're looking for, I suspect that there are a large number of modules in the gallery that will help you accomplish sort of NuGet CLI wrappers. But if that's not the case, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm happy to follow up to see what the sort of scenarios are that PowerShell package management and PowerShell GET do not meet.
Cool. And we still have some time for some new questions from the audience, and we have a couple of questions still here in the queue. So there's a question from Louis about if I use on Windows substitute system for Linux and Ubuntu, and I use the snapped version of PowerShell, and do I have to worry about removing that version in the future for the official release?
No, those should work great side by side. We support the preview version side by side with the non-preview, the snap version side by side with the regular package. Those should work okay. You may need to do some things with your path environment variable to make sure that you know which one it is that you're loading, and you may need to use kind of an absolute full path in order to get to the binary that you want, but those can exist on a machine side by side.
Cool. Then there's a question, I don't know how we would answer to this, but it basically says, why is PowerShell better on Linux than Windows? This is one of my favorite questions. Jason, you obviously have an answer.
Boy, that's like a setup, right? PowerShell is better. It is better. I don't really have an answer for that other than to say I don't look at things as better. Although I have to say, is it useful? Does it empower you? Does it allow you to be successful? Absolutely. And let's go with that. And other than that, it's not a question of better. It's what you need. And do you have what you need when you need it? And in my case, PowerShell usually delivers on that promise. It's always delivered on it so far. So,
yeah, very good answer. And I think you answered the follow-up question from the same person. Why is PowerShell better on Windows? So it's better on
same
both.
thing.
Yeah. And then there's an actual question about, does Azure AD support Linux? So I think the answer is that Azure AD kind of support Linux, but Linux doesn't really fully support Azure AD officially yet. There are ways to do domain joins using Kerberos and others, but I think in the future we hopefully see something official about this. But for now, it's more or less like workarounds, and you can use things like SSSD, which is the secure authentication daemon in Linux. So there are ways to do it, and if there's like a real business case, it's good to reach out to your Microsoft technical account to see how we can actually work around the problem there. And maybe one question almost in the end is about Visual Studio Code and PowerShell development. Is Visual Studio Code an overkill for that, or is it what features you recommend in VSC that make things easier?
Happy to take that one. Yeah, so Visual Studio Code is phenomenal, right? If you've used the ISE before, you know it's really, really helpful to have a code editor side by side with your terminal so that you can do kind of rapid prototyping, debugging, and then publishing of your scripts to wherever they're going. So we've got an awesome terminal in VSCode. You get a lot of the sort of interoperability with other data formats and other plugins. So for me, I love my Vim key bindings. Got to have them. So having that in VSCode, just install it as an extension. Boom, I'm good to go. But even in the PowerShell extension, we've got all these crazy features, and I'm just going to rattle some off that you should definitely look into. But like notebooks, we've got the ISE mode where you'll actually get the theme and shortcuts of ISE. Notebooks are this awesome way to mix rich text with code. A ton of different features around debugging, remote connections to other machines. I love the ability to host VS Code on another machine and then connect remotely to that machine from a VS Code front end, so that I always have my workspace available on that remote workstation. I just pop it open and VS Code comes back to exactly where it was with my PowerShell in the state that it was. Tons of remoting features, highlighting, script analyzer best practices that show up as little squiggles. VS Code's amazing. You should definitely be using VS Code if you haven't tried it already.
And yeah. Tony, something that Joey said really can't be overstated, especially if you're a big fan of the ISE. Take a look at VS Code and the feature that Joey mentioned, ISE mode. What this does is it takes VS Code, and it can be confusing, especially at first to a lot of people with the buttons all over the place and what does everything do. So to make it more comfortable for somebody that's spent a lot of time with the ISE, you can quickly flip it to ISE mode, and it looks like the ISE, uses the same color schemes, the buttons are in the right places that you would expect them to be, so it makes your transition much easier. And the importance to that is also what Joey was saying was all of the new features that we are working on that makes it easier for you to manage and to work on your scripts, especially remotely, are in VS Code. ISE doesn't give you this stuff. So this is really, VS Code's the right way to go, and ISE mode can help you through a lot of the pain points.
Yes, excellent. And I think maybe the last question that we have time to talk about, actually it comes up a couple of times, and I think it's about misunderstanding of what PowerShell actually is. There's a question about what's the motivation behind bringing PowerShell to Linux and Mac when those platforms already have well-established tools. And let me try to answer this first myself, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's a misunderstanding that PowerShell would be a shell PowerShell is not, it's not a terminal. So the person asking is probably having difficulties understanding what is the terminal, what is the shell inside. So things like Windows terminal are very nice tools, or Xterm or something in Linux. But then the stuff that you do inside is PowerShell or Bash or Command Com and so on. Any comments to this? I think let's do a round with everyone. Danny, Joey, Jason.
Yeah, I would add on, one of the primary motivations, and I was one of the PMs that was on the project when we originally went to open source and made the decision then to port to Linux as well, was really just this shift towards cloud management APIs, right? So the reality is that all of us are doing less and less system management every day. PowerShell started as this tool for managing Windows Server. We're doing less and less system management and more at the next layer of abstraction, which is, dealing with Azure, AWS, GCP, all of which have PowerShell core commandlets as well that are well supported. And all of these Azure or all of these cloud APIs, REST APIs, they all talk JSON.
Yeah.
And what's JSON? It's an object serialization format, and PowerShell does a great job with objects. So the ability to interact with these REST APIs, get these objects back, and then being able to do brain surgery on these, these JSON objects and parse things out. It's very, very useful.
Yeah, good. Thanks, everyone. We are running out of time, and I've changed the slide to the resources. I hope everyone finds these useful, and I hope everyone found the Q&A and the session overall very useful. And very much thank you to joining the session today. And have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great
folks.
night.